Well, the man who's got the, I think, sometimes enviable job of calling all these great horses home is Terry Spargo, and this is exactly how he learns the colours and a little bit about what makes him tick.
Terry Spargo first arrived in the UAE in November 2000. During that time, the Australian Commentator has called home over 3,500 winners. The first was a horse called My Welcome, and we had the pleasure to meet the man himself and get behind the microphone and binoculars to get to know a bit more about the voice of racing here in the Emirates.
I think most of us do exactly the same thing, and that's virtually just repeating the horse's name over to ourselves while we're looking at it, or looking at the colours representing that horse. Obviously, sometimes you just look at the jockey if he hasn't mounted as yet, and I think most of us have basically the same technique, just repeat it over and over. It can be sometimes, particularly if you see a horse in one set of the stable's colours one week and then the next week it comes out in another set of the stable's colours. That can be a bit disconcerting sometimes, but I suppose it's one of the tricks of the trade. You've got to clear your mind as to what went before. When I have time, do the form, the same as any punter may do, but I try not to go into a race with a preconceived notion of how it'll be run. I think it's probably better just to describe what's happening in front of you without worrying about preconceived notions. It depends on where you are. Obviously at Jebel Ali, when they're behind the hill, you have to use the television screen. But as I've explained before, I'm still a little old-fashioned, because when I began in this trade in Australia, radio was the main medium of covering racing. So there was very little TV coverage. There certainly wasn't the sort of TV coverage we get today, and it was impossible to actually call races off a television screen. You can do it nowadays, but you couldn't then. I would say perhaps a 2-mile race is probably a little easier to do, believe it or not, even if it has a big field, because they settle down, sort themselves out, and you've got more time to think about it. A big field sprint is a little more difficult because you're trying to get through every horse. Close finish is a close finish. It doesn't really matter if it's the end of 2 miles or the end of 1,200 metres. You want to get it right. The Aussie, oi, oi, oi one was completely just came into my head as it happened. Sometimes, every now and again, a line, you'll look at a horse's name and a line will jump into your head, you know, when you're doing the form, and you think, gee, if that horse happens to win, a line like this might be okay, and you stick it away in the back of your head, and then the trick is remembering it when it actually gets down to the heat of battle. But Benedetti for Australia, oi, 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 it's an Aussie win. In 10 seasons it hasn't happened. Touch wood, it won't, but it's just sort of one of those things where we have to keep going. You've got to do the best you can with it, and luckily in the 10 seasons, now 11 seasons that I've been working here, I haven't got to a point where I haven't been able to work. The one that comes to mind usually when I'm asked this question is I was doing a harness race on the Gold Coast in Australia many years ago, a nighttime harness race, in a broadcast box that was open like this one. The race was about 1.5 miles long, and they probably got to the halfway point and a moth flew straight down my throat. And you had to keep going. I had to explain what had happened because I was starting to sound very, very funny, but I had about another 90 seconds to finish the race off, and they don't taste very good. I had wanted to be a racing commentator from about the time I was 6. I used to listen to the races with my grandfather and great uncle on the radio in the afternoons, and I heard people like Ken Howard, Vince Curry, Bert Bryant, and it just always enthralled me. I did have a slight family connection with racing, and hence why my grandfather and great uncle were listening. And it just stuck with me all the way through that I wanted to be a racing commentator. I didn't know how I was going to go about it, or how it actually started. I would drive vocational counsellors at schools mad. They'd say, what do you want to do for a living? I want to be a race caller. You want to be a what? What's your second pick? And eventually I was able to break in. I went and did a radio course. I actually, believe it or not, worked as a disc jockey on radio for a while, all the time calling races, and eventually got a job with a major metropolitan station, and it went from there. I suppose it depends on the error. If you've made an error and you think that perhaps it didn't stand out that much, it's probably better just to let it go. If it's a major one, then you just have to try and correct it. Yeah, you get phased. I suppose that's one of the tricks of the trade, is to try and not sound phased, but every now and again, the brain being the brain will play a trick on you, and you'll come to a horse who not 15 seconds before you named the name, and all of a sudden it goes blank, and oh, what is that sort of thing? And there's little tricks of getting around it. I love doing the job. It's what I've always wanted to do, and I do want to be as good at it as I can be, so I suppose I just drive myself to be as good as I can. Strategic News has another crack. Pompeyana says, no you don't, and it is a boil over in the 1,000 guineas, but here comes the favourite, and Malayin, and the jet plane is run out of fuel. He's coming down the centre of the track and letting down with a big run. JPEG flat, he can't win. Gladiatorius almost from go to woe. Holkin sitting down. He's come from last Summit Surge and he's won. Silver Mist in the mist.